We're here for another episode of the Many Hats of Coco, and we're at the Tronson Art Gallery. I'm going to host the show today. I am Theo Czuk, and today I'm real excited to have a local legend author here today. He's a novelist and a nonfiction writer, which is pretty special in the field of writing. And this will be Bill Sullivan. And Bill, how would you like to come up and join me right now?
All right, thank you, Theo. All right.
Thanks. Have a seat right here. We're just going to jump in. So I did mention that, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
I did mention that you are both a novelist and a fiction writer, and a novelist and a nonfiction writer, and that's pretty exciting for me because although I've done novels, I've never done nonfiction. And is there something different between those two that you would like to share with us?
Well, I'm best known as the Hiiker Guy. I've written a half a dozen books about hiking in Oregon, and they're a lot of fun because I get to go hiking all summer. I mean, what a tough job, go hiking for a living.
Oh, poor baby.
I know, somebody has to do this.
Yeah.
But it doesn't use every bit of my creativity, so like you, I like to slip in and do fiction when the weather's bad. You know, you're stuck all winter, well, you got to do something. So, and that actually was my training. I studied creative writing at Cornell and then it turns out it's actually fairly hard to make a living as a novelist. Maybe you discovered this.
Indeed.
Yeah, that like a first novel from an unknown author, no, it's not going to get published. There are only a few dozen people in the world that make a living as a novelist, really. Mm-hmm. But nonfiction, people actually do walk into bookstores and say, do you have a book about the trails or things to do nearby or golf courses or knitting? But they don't walk in and say, do you have a book about a suburban housewife's angst or her grandmother's musings on aliens in poetry? There are some things that are harder to sell.
You're right, I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah.
But that's great. So
but you don't do the alien musings on poetry. It's more adventure stuff.
Do not, yeah. Yeah, it's more adventure.
You see, that's halfway between the two things I do, the outdoorsy stuff and then the murder mysteries and things.
So do you find there are different disciplines? You approach fiction and nonfiction differently?
No, I think they're really very similar. You have to plan out either kind of book, and the fiction requires more research than nonfiction. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a historical novel, you have to know everything about the Viking Age. The Viking book I did, that took years. Mm-hmm. You get anything wrong. Did they have safety pins in the Viking Age? Well, they did. But if you said it and they didn't, then somebody'd say, this book is garbage. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of research for either one. And then the quality of writing really matters. And people ask me, what should I do to if I want to write a book? And I say, well, read a lot, and then you really do. It helps to study English, because if you are writing hiking guidebooks and you love to hike, that's half the battle. But if you can't describe it in a way that makes it interesting, then it's harder to sell it. So I try to do both of them. A little artistically, I guess.
So when you're doing nonfiction, there's not so much a wall to hit.
What do you mean?
Is there?
A wall to hit?
Well, you can always go back to the facts, whereas fiction,
yeah. Huh.
Do you find any difference in that? I don't know because I haven't tried nonfiction.
Well, let's take an example of a book on Oregon's greatest natural disasters. This is nonfiction, and I'm talking, I did one, it's about fires, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, and you have to pick which disasters you're going to do. In this case, they couldn't be man-made, so they had to be natural disasters. And then I limited it to by disasters that affected people, which means they couldn't be more than 14,000 years in the past, because that's when people arrived in Oregon. But it did allow me to talk about Ice Age floods that killed everybody in the Willamette Valley every 50 years for the first 2,000 years that people lived here, and the eruption of Mount Mazama that was 7,000 years ago, and so people had been living in that area for 7,000 years, and it probably killed half the population of Oregon. But so you have to choose what you're going to write about in nonfiction as well. And if it's a 100 hikes book, well, you got 100. And you can put 100 more at the back in brief, but you got to pick which ones are good and then write about it in an interesting enough way that people will want to read the book. And this is the whole challenge. Freelance writing is tough. You know, my father was the editor of the Salem newspaper, and I swore I'd never go into newspaper journalism because it was too hard. You had to work 9 to 5 and 2 weeks vacation. And everybody else in that news office was dying young of ulcers and alcoholism and stress, really. And so I said, well, I'll be a freelance writer. So instead of working 9 to 5, I work from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. and there's no vacations, you know, right? Turns out to be a lot harder, and there's no paycheck, you know. If you write, you can spend a year writing a book, and it turns out not such a good idea. Well, that's a little riskier.
Have you had to throw out a book that you spent a whole year working on?
I did.
Ouch.
Yeah, I was doing a book about John Muir. I'd done a historical novel about Joaquin Miller, who was kind of the wildest pioneer I could find in Oregon's history. He was the first world famous writer to come out of Oregon. Became world famous as a cowboy poet, but then had trouble because it turns out he really had shot a sheriff and had 2 wives at once, but then was elected county judge. So he was an interesting guy. And I thought, okay, now I'll do my next one about John Muir, who's another great icon of the West. Well, it turns out this guy had basically no sex life and no controversy, really. He was just a really nice guy.
Death to a novel.
I know, right. Right. It was, you could do nonfiction about him, and you could quote him at great length, but a fiction story, it'd be hard. So I had to give that one up.
Well, that's generally about fiction and nonfiction. I did want to touch, go specific, because you have a new book coming up, and I'd like to put that up on the screen.
Okay.
And I actually had an opportunity to read it, and I enjoyed it immensely. And what was kind of fun is having perused, my wife's a fan of your nonfiction writing, and I've perused that. I'm a fan of fiction, so I read this, and I did notice that there's a lot of things you take from nonfiction and incorporate. So a bicyclist traveling the coast.
Right.
Do you remember what your book was about?
Yeah, I had Cycle Oregon.
Your memory?
Yeah, go ahead. I'd like to hear what your version of it is. I don't know.
No, you are here. This is your stage. So
do you want me to describe it quickly?
Sure,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is the third in my series of murder mysteries that have an Oregon hook. Because I've done all the hiking guidebooks, and that's the physical landscape of Oregon, and I wanted to talk about the emotional landscape, the people and quirky stuff. So the first one in that series was about a missing Einstein formula that turns up in an attic in Eugene. I mean, this could happen. And the second one was about D.B. Cooper, and that's the classic unsolved mystery of the Northwest. What happened to this guy who parachuted with $250,000 and escaped? You know, maybe, as is the premise in my book, he really is 70 years old, living in Portland in plain sight, but being blackmailed by the Russian mafia. Yeah, could happen, you know. Another really interesting episode in Oregon history were the Rajneeshis. And this was in the 1980s when a guru from India brought 3,000 devotees to Oregon, built a city in the eastern Oregon desert with its own airline and everything, and then ran afoul of land use laws. And one of his lieutenants wound up poisoning hundreds of people, trying to assassinate the attorney general and overthrow the government. So how do you write a novel about that and make it entertaining? So the Bhagwan, Sri Rajneesh, has been dead for 27 years. That's true. So the premise to my murder mystery is that he has been reincarnated as a 26-year-old barista in Northeast Portland. So they start up the whole movement again, And they build another commune, a big city near Crater Lake, and then people start dying, and they have to bring in my detective from Portland that cracked the D.B. Cooper case, and he comes in to try to sort things out, see what's really going wrong out there. Is that pretty much what you got out of this?
That's what I got out of it, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. You did well.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. It had a nice drama in it and really fun character development. And it's interesting that this character is the character that was the reoccurring detective.
Neil Ferguson.
But he retired in this one.
Yeah.
So is he going to be, well, maybe we shouldn't look ahead, but I was kind of curious if there's more of him.
Yeah, well, when you're writing fiction, maybe you've noticed this. Sometimes you have a fictional character who just takes over the book. That happened in my first one about the case of Einstein's violin. I had this hippie chick named Harmony, and she was a minor character, but she was so unpredictable and crazy and exciting that she just took over the book, and I kind of gave her free rein, and she ran away with it. And so people said, you've got to bring back Harmony. Well, she is the logical person to become a Rajneeshi. She falls for the group and then has to come to grips with them when it turns out it's not everything she'd imagined. Mm-hmm. And it was the same with Neil Ferguson, her uncle, who cracked the D.B. Cooper case. And he has problems. I mean, every detective does, probably, especially in the noir category. You know, he's recovered alcoholic, but recovered, and he's got, his wife died, and he's dating somebody in the department, which is not really right either, and then he's a little older. You know, when you're 60, they're ready to retire you, but that made him edgy enough that people wanted him back too. So he comes back to see what's really going on with the reincarnation of the Bhagwan.
Very nice, very nice. And I did enjoy Harmony, incidentally. And
you see?
She's quirky.
She's a firecracker, yeah. She's like Coco or something, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, indeed. I think Coco's flattered by that. You said your father was a journalist.
Yeah.
So did you always suspect you'd be a writer, or was he a big influence that way? Or?
Yeah, no, I grew up sort of assuming that I would be a writer. That's what we did in the family, I guess. And, but I did want to differentiate myself from him. And now, of course, I write the outdoor column for the newspapers in Eugene and Salem. And so, yes, they've got a Sullivan byline back in the Statesman Journal. So I wound up, you know, apples only fall so far from the tree. You wind up eventually going back. Mm-hmm. So I write for the papers now too. Mm-hmm.
Do you find you do anything different now as deep into your career, number of books down?
Well, I've done 21 books now. 21 books. And each one takes a year, you know. And then with these hiking guidebooks, I have to update them, several of them, every year. The ones for Portland and Eugene, those update every single year. So this is an ongoing job. Would I do it differently? Gosh, I don't know. The first years were pretty hard. I actually got a job as a high school English teacher out of college, first year, and hated it. I worked in a small school outside of Portland, and I was assigned 5 classes of sophomore English, and these kids were interested in anything except Shakespeare, and I like Shakespeare. It was just torture. And at the end of the year, I said, you know, I'd rather do anything else in the world. And my wife said, you want to be a freelance writer? We've saved a little money. I'm working as a preschool teacher. If we live cheap, we can get by for 7 years. I will support you for 7 years as a freelance writer. But if at the end of 7 years you are not making a living as a freelance writer, you must swear to me that you will get a job clerking at Kmart.
Boy, did you work hard to become a writer.
Those were very tough years. I wrote this novel, and I got an agent, but couldn't get it published. And so then I wound up hiking 1,000 miles across Oregon. I figured I'd get 2 books out of it. The story of my adventures which became published as Listening for Coyote, and then a guidebook to the wilderness areas. But I had no money, so I just bought a one-way ticket to the westernmost point of Oregon and had 9 food drops at mountain passes, and then had a one-way ticket coming back from Hell's Canyon in Joseph on the eastern end of Oregon, and walked through 18 wilderness areas in one summer. The whole trip cost $230, and I got 2 books out of it. And though the adventure story, Listening for Coyote, my agent auctioned to 16 publishers in New York, and the high bid was $25,000 advance. In 1980s, this was more money than I'd earned in my life, more than I'd seen at one time. It reset the clock. But it also sort of branded me as the hiker guy. And I ran with that, you know, great, I'll write the hiking guidebooks too. So those were tough years. And I think the important thing for an artist or any author is to have somebody who believes in you. Even if you're not sure about yourself. My wife was willing to take that risk. She believed in me. And, you know, it did pay off. Those were hard years, but now she retired from her preschool teaching job, and she does editing for me. And we go traveling around, and I just want to thank her.
Well, good. It's a good forum to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I won't ask you what your favorite hike is.
Okay.
But how about
I get asked that a lot. Right.
somehow I suspected that was the case. What frustrations as a writer?
Frustrations? Well, one frustration is the rise of social media, so that that people will be asked, "What is your favorite hike?" and they'll say, "Green Lakes." And within a week, there are 1,000 cars at the Green Lakes trailhead. This is not a joke. This is true. And so there's like 6 or 8 trailheads that are suddenly jammed, and everybody's looking at their phone and say, "Well, I was told this is the coolest place, but it's not, because there's cars everywhere. I can't even see the mountain. There's people everywhere. It's crazy." So my books, I have 500 hikes books, but they each have 100 more at the back. So there's 1,000 hikes in there. And you know, a lot of them are really, really good.
Yeah.
I guess it's a little frustrating, people who just do the most famous one, or heard about it in social media. There are so many other interesting things.
Does it give you a feeling of power at all to be able to have 1,000 people show up? I mean, you can...
I don't do that. There's somebody else that's doing that. Other people are doing that. My goal is to send people to 1,000 different trails and have them discover that, wow, at this time of year, I'm alone, this is gorgeous. Nobody knows about this waterfall, this secret lake, this glacier up here. There's nobody here. This is terrific. You could sit there and camp and write a whole novel and not be bothered by the crowds. So I think part of my mission as a guidebook author is to help preserve Oregon. I was raised to believe that you should leave a campsite in as good shape as you found it, or better. And I believe that is true for a state as well. And this is hard, because a lot of people are moving to Oregon, often because of the recreation, and there is a lot of pressure to develop and destroy the things that we live here for, the most important things. And crowds going to the same old place will do that. So I'd like to, with my books, encourage people to go out and explore the less known spots and love them, and then get mad if they get developed or destroyed. And I guess that's my secret message there. And then with the novels, maybe my secret message is that Oregon's a quirky place, and there are a lot of quirky people here, that we have a quirky history, but it's not all good. There have been some tragedies and some mistakes in Oregon's past, and I think it's important to look at those and the novels try to reveal who we are as Oregonians, with the hope that we can be better.
Very nice. Very nice. Mama, Miss America, where has your family gone? I've been waiting by your cities now. I've been waiting in this fog, and I understand you're older now with no fire in your eye. But Mama, Miss America, don't let the children see you cry. Mama, I've swum in all your waters now, from sea to shining sea, and I've come to know the undertow that's drowning all our dreams. And it's so damn hard to think of you and your long-lost virgin pride. But Mama, Miss America, don't let the children see you cry. Mama, from purple mountains' majesty to amber waves of grain, I wanted so to raise your flag, but it always looked like rain. And I want to stand behind you now, and God knows that I've tried. But Mama, Miss America, don't let the children see you cry. Mama, and Mama, Miss America, it's so sad what we've wrought, but I want to be your hero, your silver patriot, and I want so much to comfort you and hold your head up high. But Mama, Miss America, don't let the children see ya. Mama, Miss America, don't let the children see ya. Mama, Miss America, don't let the children see ya cry. Mama. Thank you. Thank you.
Theo, I believe Coco has a couple of questions.
Yeah, Coco.
Okay.
What do we got?
Uh-huh.
What do we got?
So the first question is, what's the title, the full title of the new book?
That's a good question. It's this is the case of the Reborn Bhagwan.
And it's currently available?
Oh yes, yeah, it came out last month, and it's in the series The Case of. The first one is the case of Einstein's violin. The second one is the case of D.B. Cooper's parachute, and this the case of the Reborn Bhagwan. Here's a little hint. That is a pun. Each one actually has a case. There is a violin case in the one of Einstein's violin. The violin never shows up. You keep waiting for it to show up, but it's the violin case that really, and here again, there's a case.
I think you said before, are all of your books, your novels, Oregon-based?
All except for one. I have one that's about set in Norway, about the greatest Viking burial ship of all time. It's called The Ship in the Hill, and it's inspired by my wife, who's of Danish background. And we took, yeah, okay, got some Danes in the crowd, all right. But she was impressed that the greatest Viking burial ship ever found was buried for a woman. And when they found that ship in a hill in Norway in 1904, they didn't think women were even allowed on Viking ships. So who's this queen? Well, we took 5 trips to Norway and translated the sagas from Old Norse about this ship to find out the story of the queen. And it's a fascinating story. In the book, I alternate chapters between the excavation of the ship in 1904, a true story, and then the saga of the queen 1,000 years earlier, who it turns out is really trying to stop the Vikings and wins.
Do you have a favorite fictional author?
Oh my. Well, we are being interviewed in Springfield, so I'm going to say Ken Kesey. And actually, I have a soft spot for Ken. He and I did book signings together for years, and he's a literary legend, and I'm thinking that maybe the next in this Case of series will be the case of Kesey's lost novel. So we'll see. We'll see.
What age did you start writing?
Well, in the 3rd grade, I won an award for a strange piece I'd written, and so I was encouraged to write from a very, very, very early age. So, yeah, I never stopped writing after the 3rd grade, and I did the first hike when I was 5, and sort of been hiking ever since. But I don't actually never grew up hiking more than most people in Oregon. It's just I wound up becoming the hiker guy, and that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I do want you to tell everybody where they can find your website. Could you just...
Oh,
say
yes.
it for our
Well, that'd be
audience,
OregonHiking.com, and you'll find there 500 of my hikes and 14 of my favorite ones with all of its instructions, and a wildflower search engine that will let you see pictures of every wildflower in Oregon in 4 seconds, and there's a lot of information there. And my schedule of appearances, I give about 60 to 80 slideshows a year throughout Oregon. I do an author's tour, and so I'll be talking about the Bhagwan in Salem and Eugene and Bend and Portland and all over. Check OregonHiking.com for my calendar.
Wonderful. Bill, it's been such a pleasure having you here today.
No? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Seriously, thank you for coming.
Oh, well, my pleasure.
Thank you.